When Xerxes struck down King Leonidas at Thermopylae, he thought he had broken Sparta forever. He was wrong. 1 year later, Sparta returned, not for glory, but for blood. This is the revenge Persia tried to bury. The past that would not fall silent. Smoke still curled from the narrow pass at Thermopylae when the Persian army finally moved forward, 3 days after the last Spartan spear had splintered. Xerxes, king of kings, ruler of the largest empire the world had yet seen, walked his horse over ground so choked with bodies that his soldiers had to clear a path for him. 300 Spartans. 700 Thespians. A handful of the bands who had not run. All of them dead, and yet somehow, the silence in that pass felt louder than any battle cry. Xerxes had expected celebration. Instead, his officers stood quiet, unsettled by what they had watched these Greeks do, hold a mountain pass for 2 full days against a force that outnumbered them more than 20 to 1, and when finally outflanked, choose to die rather than kneel. It was not the kind of victory a king could parade through his empire and feel clean about. Herodotus, writing decades later, recorded what came next as a moment that revealed more about Xerxes' fear than his power. The Persian king ordered the body of Leonidas found among the dead. When it was brought before him, Xerxes did something no Persian king was expected to do to a fallen enemy commander. He had the body treated with dishonor, the head raised on a stake for all to see. It was meant as a message, this is what defiance costs. But among the Greeks who would hear of it in the months to come, the message read very differently. It read as fear disguised as cruelty. A king so shaken by 300 men that he needed to desecrate a corpse to feel powerful again. News of Thermopylae reached Sparta not as a defeat, but as prophecy fulfilled. Sparta was a city that raised its sons on a single unbending idea, return with your shield, or on it. Leonidas had done exactly that. But news of what Xerxes had done to his body reached Sparta too, carried by traders and refugees fleeing south as the Persian army rolled toward Athens. And in the stone halls of the Spartan assembly, grief curdled into something colder and far more dangerous, a debt that would have to be repaid in full. A king's body, a nation's wound. In Persian tradition, the dead, even enemy dead, were treated with a degree of ritual respect. Persian kings were expected to honor courage, even in an opponent. That Xerxes broke this custom with Leonidas was, to many ancient writers, the detail that made his cruelty so notable. It was not standard practice. It was personal. Word of it spread through the Greek world like poison through water. In Sparta, where Leonidas's wife, Queen Gorgo, still walked the halls of the palace, the insult was not abstract. It was her husband's body, displayed like a warning sign on a mountain road. The Spartan council did not need philosophers to explain what this meant. An affront to a king's body was an affront to the gods who had blessed his line. The Agead dynasty traced its ancestry to Heracles himself. To dishonor Leonidas was, in Spartan eyes, to spit on divine order. But Sparta could not move yet. Athens had been evacuated and burned. The Persian general Mardonius, left behind by Xerxes to finish the conquest, wintered in Boeotia with a hand-picked force, waiting for the Greek alliance to crumble under its own divisions, which, for a while, it nearly did. Athens, whose navy had helped win the pivotal sea battle at Salamis, felt abandoned by a Sparta more concerned with defending its own peninsula behind the wall at the Isthmus of Corinth than marching north to help. Mardonius, sensing the fracture, even offered the Athenians a separate peace, hoping to pull them out of the alliance entirely. The Athenians refused. And they made certain a Spartan delegation was present to hear them refuse it, a pointed reminder that Sparta's hesitation had a cost. That winter, in the Agoge, the brutal training grounds where Spartan boys were shaped from age 7 into soldiers, a new class of young men sharpened their spears a little differently. Every Spartan already knew the stories of Leonidas from childhood. Now they carried a second story alongside it, what had been done to his body, and what would need to be done in answer. The oath and the march. By spring, Sparta could delay no longer. Athens sent envoys warning that if help did not come, Athens might have no choice but to accept Persian terms after all, a threat as much as a plea. It worked. The Spartan regent Pausanias, guardian to Leonidas's young son Pleistarchus and now holding the second Spartan throne, assembled the largest army Sparta had ever fielded, reportedly 5,000 full Spartan citizens, backed by tens of thousands of allied hoplites and helots from across the Peloponnese. This was not simply a war of territory. To the men marching north that spring, this was personal. They marched not just to stop Mardonius from finishing what Xerxes started, they marched to answer what had been done to their king. The armies of Greece converged near the city of Plataea in Boeotia, close to the very region where Mardonius had encamped his Persian force along the banks of the Asopus River. Spartans, Athenians, Corinthians, Tegeans, Megarians, city-states that spent as much time fighting each other as cooperating, stood shoulder to shoulder on the same plane for the first time in the war. Pausanias commanded the whole force. It was, in every sense, the reckoning Persia had been dreading since Thermopylae. 2 armies, 1 river. 4 days, the armies watched each other across the Esopus, neither willing to cross first and surrender the advantage of ground. Mardonius commanded elite Persian cavalry, including units drawn from across the empire, plus the famed immortals, an infantry corps of 10,000 handpicked soldiers. His force likely outnumbered the Greeks, but the terrain favored the Greek phalanx, rocky slopes, narrow approaches, ground that broke up cavalry charges and forced infantry to fight where hoplite shield walls were strongest. Mardonius grew impatient. Persian raids cut Greek supply lines, and a shift in Greek positioning at night, meant to draw water and regroup, was misread by Persian scouts as a retreat. Mardonius, sensing opportunity, ordered a general advance, believing the fractured Greek lines were an army already breaking apart. He was wrong, and it would cost him everything. The Battle of Plataea. What followed was not the chaotic skirmish Mardonius expected but a set-piece collision of 2 of the ancient world's most disciplined fighting forces. The Spartans, holding the right of the Greek line as was their traditional honor, bore the brunt of the Persian infantry assault and the deadly volleys of Persian archers. Herodotus records that the Spartans endured the arrow storm without breaking formation, waiting, with almost unbearable discipline, for the sacrificial omens to turn favorable before advancing. When they finally did advance, the impact was overwhelming. Persian infantry, for all its numbers, lacked the heavy armor and long spears of the Greek hoplite. Persian shields, often wicker rather than bronze-faced, splintered under repeated spear strikes. The battle became a brutal test of endurance along the Greek right flank, Tegeans and Spartans grinding forward step by step against Persia's finest infantry, while on the other flank Athenians fought Persia's Greek allies from Thebes and Boeotia in an equally vicious struggle. At the center of the Persian line, on a white horse, rode Mardonius himself, the general who had stayed behind when Xerxes retreated, the man now responsible for finishing Persia's conquest of Greece. The fall of Mardonius. Ancient sources agree on the moment that broke the battle. Mardonius, fighting near the front alongside his elite guard, was struck down and killed. The instant his death spread through the Persian ranks, the calculated discipline of the immortals collapsed into panic. Without their commander, without the cohesion that had held the Persian formation together, the army that had once numbered in the tens of thousands began to disintegrate. The Greeks pressed the advantage without mercy. Persian soldiers fled toward their fortified camp, a wooden palisade near the river, only to find the Greek pursuit unrelenting. When Athenian and allied forces broke through the palisade walls, what followed was less a battle than a rout, the destruction of an army that had marched confidently into Greece a year earlier believing the conquest already secured by Xerxes' campaign of terror. It is worth noting what Pausanias did not do. Later Greek writers took care to record that, unlike the treatment inflicted upon Leonidas, the Spartan regent refused calls to mutilate Mardonius's body in retaliation. Sparta's vengeance would be measured in the destruction of Persia's army and ambitions, not in the desecration of a corpse. It was, in its own grim way, the more complete answer, proof that Sparta's strength did not need cruelty to prove itself. The same sun, a second fire. While the dust of Plataea was still settling, hundreds of miles away across the Aegean, a second Greek force, a fleet under Spartan king Leonidas and Athenian commander Xanthippus, landed on the beaches near Mount Mycale on the coast of Ionia, modern-day western Turkey. There, a Persian army had drawn up its ships as a makeshift fortress, hoping to use the beached fleet and a wooden barricade as a defensive wall. According to tradition, word of the Greek victory at Plataea reached the soldiers at Mycale that very same day, carried, some ancient writers claimed, by rumor spreading unnaturally fast along the coast, a story ancient historians themselves found almost too fitting to be true, and said as much. True or not, the timing captured something real, 2 devastating blows to the Persian war effort, land and sea, arriving together. At Mycale, Ionian Greek soldiers serving in the Persian ranks, men who had been conscripted from Greek cities under Persian rule, turned on their Persian commanders mid-battle, tipping the fight decisively toward the invading Greek force. The Persian barricade was overrun, their ships burned on the sand, and Persia's presence on the Ionian coast, the very region where the entire war had first ignited decades earlier, was shattered in a single afternoon. 2 symbolic humiliations, on land and at sea, on what tradition remembers as a single day. Between them, they marked the effective end of Xerxes' invasion of Greece. The reckoning complete. News of Plataea and Mycale spread through the Greek world as the true, unambiguous answer to Thermopylae. Xerxes had displayed Leonidas's body to prove Persian power was absolute. A year later, the army he left behind to finish his conquest no longer existed. The message Sparta sent back was not one of desecration, but of annihilation: Persia's finest infantry destroyed, its most trusted general dead on the field, its foothold on the Ionian coast burned to ash. For Sparta specifically, there was a particular, personal satisfaction threaded through the victory. It had been Spartan discipline holding the line under arrow fire at Plataea. It had been a Spartan king's death at Thermopylae that lit the fuse. And it would be Sparta's regent standing over the field where Mardonius fell. Act 9, The Bones Come Home. The story does not end at Plataea. Herodotus tells us that Leonidas's remains were eventually recovered, though not for another 40 years, long after the war had ended and a new generation of Spartans had grown up on the story of Thermopylae as legend rather than memory. When his bones were finally returned to Sparta, he was buried again with full royal honors, and funeral games were established in his memory, held annually thereafter. At Thermopylae itself, the Greeks raised a monument over the burial mound of the fallen, inscribed with an epitaph attributed to the poet Simonides, words carved in stone that would outlast every empire that ever tried to erase them, a simple message to travelers passing through, telling them that here, men obeyed their laws and did not run. Xerxes wanted the world to remember Thermopylae as the day Persian power crushed Greek defiance. Instead, the world remembers it as the spark. Sparta did not answer with a display on a stake. It answered with the complete unmaking of the army sent to finish the job, a debt paid not in cruelty, but in the total, undeniable defeat of the empire that thought 300 dead men would be the end of the story.